I didn't believe in monsters. Growing up in a small town near the Rio Grande, we had plenty of stories about strange creatures lurking in the shadows, but I always thought they were just tall tales meant to scare children into behaving. That all changed on a sweltering night in the summer of 2008, when I saw something that still haunts me. It started like any other evening. I had just finished a long shift at the diner, my feet aching from standing all day. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the air thick and heavy with humidity. The cicadas hummed their monotonous song as I trudged down the dirt road leading to my house. The night sky stretched above me, filled with stars that seemed close enough to touch, but all I wanted was to collapse into bed. My family owned a small ranch outside of town. It wasn't much, just a few acres of land and a handful of cattle, but it was home. As I neared the property, something felt off. The air was too still. The usual chorus of crickets and frogs had gone silent, and a strange tension hung in the atmosphere. I shook it off, thinking maybe I was just tired. The ranch was quiet, except for the low grumbling of the cattle in the distance. I headed toward the barn to check on them before turning in for the night. The full moon bathed the landscape in an eerie glow, casting long shadows across the ground. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a dog or maybe a coyote. It was hunched over, its back arched in a way that didn't seem natural. The creature was on the other side of the fence, just beyond the cattle pen, moving with a strange, jerky motion. My heart skipped a beat. Coyotes weren't uncommon around here, but something about this one made my skin crawl. I grabbed a flashlight from the barn and shone it in the direction of the animal. The beam of light caught the creature's eyes, and they glowed a deep, unnatural red. My breath caught in my throat. The creature straightened up, standing on its hind legs like a person. It was thin, almost emaciated, with leathery, grayish skin stretched tightly over its bones. It had no fur, and its limbs were too long, too spindly, to belong to any animal I'd ever seen. The cattle started to panic, their low grunts turning into frantic mooing as they backed away from the fence. I stood frozen, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that rumbled deep in its throat, and then it moved, fast. In an instant, it was on the other side of the fence, crouched low to the ground as it advanced toward the cows. Panic surged through me. I reached for the old rifle we kept in the barn and aimed it at the creature, my hands shaking. I wasn't much of a shot, but at that moment, all I could think about was protecting the cattle. My finger tightened on the trigger, but before I could fire, the creature leapt onto one of the cows, sinking its fangs into its neck. The cow let out a terrible scream, a sound that I had never heard an animal make before. Blood sprayed from the wound as the creature latched onto the cow, drinking deeply like some kind of grotesque vampire. I fired the gun, the bullet whizzing past the creature and embedding itself into the fence post. The sound startled the creature, and it whipped its head around to look at me. Blood dripped from its mouth, and for a moment, we locked eyes. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. It wasn't just an animal. It was something else, something intelligent. It released the cow and snarled, baring sharp, jagged teeth before it disappeared into the shadows, moving faster than anything I had ever seen. I ran to the injured cow, but it was too late. The poor animal was lying in a pool of blood, its body twitching as the life drained from it. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around, scanning the darkness for any sign of the creature, but it was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, clutching the rifle, listening for any sounds that might indicate the creature's return. But the ranch remained quiet, almost unnervingly so. The next morning, I called the local sheriff, but when he and his deputies arrived, they were skeptical. They examined the dead cow and the strange puncture marks on its neck, but they didn't seem convinced. One of them muttered something about a wild animal attack, but I knew better. I knew what I had seen. Over the next few weeks, more cattle turned up dead, each one with the same strange bite marks. The townspeople started whispering about the legend of the chupacabra, a creature said to drain the blood of livestock. I had always dismissed the stories as folklore, but now I wasn't so sure. The attacks eventually stopped, but I never felt safe on that ranch again. Every time I walked outside at night, I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows. It's been years since that summer, but the memory of those red, glowing eyes still lingers. Sometimes, late at night, I hear strange noises in the distance, and I wonder if it's still up there, waiting. I never found out what it really was. Some nights, I convince myself it was just a wild animal, something I couldn't explain in the heat of the moment. But deep down, I know that's not true. There are things out there in the dark, things we can't understand, and I came face to face with one of them. I just hope it never comes back. It was the dead of winter, and the Wisconsin air bit at my skin as I drove down the lonely stretch of Bray Road. Snow covered the ground like a blanket, but the trees were dark, looming shapes against the night sky. My old pickup truck creaked and groaned as it rattled over the uneven road, headlights barely cutting through the swirling snow. I had been out later than I expected after visiting my friend Greg, who lived on the outskirts of town, and now I was paying for it with a long, tense drive home. Bray Road had always given me an unsettling feeling, especially at night. People in town whispered about strange sightings out there. A creature, they said, that roamed the woods and fields. Something not quite human, but not entirely animal either. I always brushed off the stories, thinking they were nothing more than local folklore. But as I glanced at the darkened woods on either side of the road, I couldn't shake a sense of unease. The radio crackled with static, the country station fading in and out as I neared the more rural parts of town. I reached over to fiddle with the dial, trying to find a clear signal, when something caught my eye. Just ahead, illuminated by my headlights, a large, dark figure darted across the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding on the icy pavement as I came to a stop. My heart was racing as I stared into the darkness where the figure had disappeared. It had been too big to be a deer, and it moved too quickly to be a person. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. A deep growl echoed through the silence, low and menacing. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Whatever it was still out there. I slowly reached for the flashlight I kept in the glove compartment, my hands trembling as I flicked it on. The beam cut through the snow, illuminating the edge of the road and the tree line beyond. At first, there was nothing, just snow, covered fields and trees. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. The creature was standing at the edge of the woods, its body partially hidden by the shadows of the trees. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, with broad shoulders and a hunched posture. Its fur was dark, almost black, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural yellow light. For a moment, we locked eyes, and a cold dread washed over me. It wasn't just an animal. There was something intelligent behind those eyes, something calculating. It took a step forward, and I saw its legs, long and muscular, covered in matted fur, but shaped more like a wolf's than a man's. Its hands, though, were eerily human, with long, clawed fingers that looked capable of tearing through flesh. The creature bared its teeth in a snarl, and I could see the sharp fangs gleaming in the faint light of the flashlight. I backed away, stumbling over the snow-covered road as I scrambled to get back into the truck. My mind raced with a single thought: I had to get out of there. I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them in my panic, but managed to start the engine just as the creature stepped onto the road. For a split second, it stood there, staring at me, and I could see its breath misting in the cold air. It let out another growl, this one deeper, more menacing, and then it charged. I slammed my foot on the gas, the truck lurching forward as the tires struggled for traction on the icy road. The creature was fast, much faster than anything that size had any right to be. It ran alongside the truck, claws scraping against the metal as it tried to reach the cab. My heart pounded in my chest, and I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I swerved, trying to shake the creature off, but it was relentless, its claws leaving deep gouges in the side of the truck. I could hear its snarls, its breath hot against the window as it lunged at the door. I glanced to my right, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I saw its face, half wolf, half man, with eyes full of rage and hunger. Somehow, I managed to pick up speed, the truck finally gaining traction on the icy road. The creature fell behind, but I didn't dare slow down. I could still see it in the rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road, watching me as I sped away. I didn't stop driving until I reached the safety of my house, several miles away. Even then, I didn't feel safe. I locked every door and window, grabbed my shotgun, and sat in the living room, staring out into the night, waiting for any sign of the creature. I didn't sleep that night, and for the next few days, I refused to leave the house after dark. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, that my mind had been playing tricks on me, but I knew what I saw, and I wasn't the only one. Over the next few weeks, more people reported strange sightings along Bray Road, large, wolf-like creatures that walked on two legs, glowing eyes watching them from the darkness. The local authorities dismissed the reports, blaming the sightings on wild animals or overactive imaginations, but those of us who had seen the creature knew better. The beast of Bray Road was real, and it was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. I moved away from Wisconsin not long after that winter. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still watching me, that one night it would come for me. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. Sometimes, when I'm driving down a dark, empty road, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, a movement in the trees, and my heart skips a beat. I don't know what the creature was or where it came from, but I do know one thing: it's out there. And if you ever find yourself driving down Bray Road at night, keep your eyes open. You might just see it too. It was early autumn in 2014, and the air was crisp as we set out into the heart of the Pine Barrens. I had been living in New Jersey my whole life, and tales of the Jersey Devil had always been part of the local lore. Everyone in town knew someone who had seen it, an aunt, a neighbor, a friend's cousin. But as much as I loved a good ghost story, I never really bought into the idea of a winged beast lurking in the woods. That was, until I saw it with my own eyes. The plan had been simple. A few friends and I, all in our mid-20s and still full of the kind of reckless energy that makes you think you're invincible, decided to spend the weekend camping in the Pine Barrens. Our friend Matt, always the joker, suggested we go looking for the Jersey Devil, as if it was some kind of scavenger hunt. I rolled my eyes at the idea, but we all laughed and played along. After all, the Barrens were vast and mysterious, and a little scare would make for a fun story. We set up camp deep in the woods, far from the nearest road. The trees were dense, their twisted branches creating a canopy overhead that blocked out most of the sunlight, even in the middle of the day. The ground was covered in a thick layer of pine needles, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the wind and the occasional call of a distant bird. There was something unsettling about the isolation, but none of us admitted it. As night fell, we gathered around the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows across the forest floor. We traded stories, laughing and trying to outdo each other with tales of ghosts, cryptids, and haunted houses. Inevitably, the conversation turned to the Jersey Devil. Matt grinned as he leaned forward, his face lit eerily by the firelight. "You guys ever hear the story of the Leeds family?" he asked. We all nodded. Of course we had. The legend went that the Jersey Devil was the 13th child of a woman named Deborah Leeds, born cursed and transformed into a hideous creature with bat-like wings, hooves, and the head of a goat. According to the legend, it had been haunting the Pine Barrens for centuries, terrorizing anyone who ventured too far into its territory. "Let's go find it," Matt said suddenly, standing up and grabbing his flashlight. The rest of us exchanged nervous glances, but one by one, we agreed. It was all in good fun, right? We grabbed our flashlights and headed into the woods, the firelight fading behind us as we ventured deeper into the barrens. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the temperature dropped noticeably the farther we went. My heart started to race, and I had to remind myself that it was just a game, that the Jersey Devil was nothing more than a story. But as we walked, the atmosphere changed. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, seemed to vanish, replaced by an eerie silence. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed through the woods, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking underfoot. We all froze, our flashlights flickering as we searched the darkness for the source of the noise. "Probably just a deer," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. We kept walking, but the tension in the group was palpable. The silence weighed on us, and every small sound seemed amplified. Then, without warning, we heard it, a high-pitched, blood-curdling screech that pierced the night. I felt my stomach drop. That sound didn't belong to any animal I knew. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, a mix of a scream and a roar, unnatural and terrifying. My hands were shaking as I gripped the flashlight tighter, scanning the woods for any sign of movement. "Did you guys hear that?" Matt's voice wavered as he turned to face us. We all nodded, our eyes wide with fear. Before anyone could respond, we heard it again, closer this time. The trees around us seemed to shudder as the sound reverberated through the forest. And then we saw it, just a glimpse at first, but enough to send my heart racing. It was in the trees, moving fast through the branches. The creature was huge, easily over 8 feet tall, with massive, leathery wings that flapped silently as it glided between the trees. Its eyes glowed a deep, fiery red, and its body was covered in dark, matted fur. It had hooves, I could see that much, but its face was a twisted, grotesque mix of a horse and a bat, with a long, snaking tail that whipped behind it. For a moment, we all stood there, frozen in place, unable to comprehend what we were seeing. Then the creature let out another screech, its wings flapping as it descended toward us. "Run!" someone shouted, and we bolted. I didn't look back. My feet pounded against the ground, the sound of the creature's wings beating the air behind me. My lungs burned, and my heart hammered in my chest as I pushed through the dense underbrush, branches slapping at my face. The creature was gaining on us. I could feel its presence, hear the snap of tree branches as it closed in. I stumbled, nearly falling face first into the dirt, but managed to catch myself and keep running. We burst out of the trees, back into the clearing where we had set up camp. I could hear Matt shouting something behind me, but his voice was drowned out by the creature's screech. I didn't stop until I reached the fire, collapsing onto the ground, gasping for breath. The others were right behind me, all of us panting and wide-eyed, looking around frantically for any sign of the Jersey Devil. But it was gone. The woods were silent again, as if nothing had happened. For a long time, none of us spoke. We just sat there, staring into the fire, trying to process what we had just seen. Eventually, Matt broke the silence. "We need to leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We all agreed. We packed up our gear in record time, and within an hour, we were back on the road, leaving the Pine Barrens, and whatever was lurking in them, far behind. None of us spoke during the drive home. There was nothing to say. We all knew what we had seen, and it wasn't just a story anymore. To this day, I still can't explain what happened that night. Maybe it was the Jersey Devil, or maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that the Pine Barrens hold secrets, and sometimes those secrets come out when you least expect them. It was late April of 2009 when I found myself driving through the winding back roads of Dover, Massachusetts. I had been visiting my girlfriend, Clara, in the nearby town of Sherburne, and after staying a bit too late, I was now faced with the reality of driving home in the dead of night. It was nearly 1 a.m., and the sleepy town of Dover was as quiet as a graveyard. The moon was high, casting a cold, pale light on the forest that surrounded me. The road twisted through dense woods, the tall trees standing like sentinels on either side. I had always heard about the Dover demon, a creature said to haunt these very woods. The stories dated back to the late 1970s when a few teenagers had reported seeing a strange, otherworldly figure near Dover. It was described as small, pale, with an oversized head and glowing eyes. People called it a cryptid, but many dismissed it as nothing more than youthful imagination. Still, every time I drove through these woods, the legend nagged at the back of my mind. That night, though, I wasn't thinking about monsters. I was just trying to get home. The road was deserted, and the only sounds were the hum of my car's engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow road ahead. I was half listening to a late-night radio show, the host droning on about government conspiracies, when something strange happened. I noticed movement in the woods to my right, a quick flash of white that stood out against the dark trees. At first, I thought it was just a deer or some other animal, but as I slowed down to get a better look, I realized it wasn't an animal at all. Standing at the edge of the road, just barely within the range of my headlights, was a small, thin figure. It couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall, with a large, bulbous head and long, spindly limbs. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes glowed a bright, eerie orange. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, that maybe the late hour was playing tricks on my mind. But then it moved. The creature turned its head slowly, locking its glowing eyes on me. I felt a chill run down my spine, and my breath caught in my throat. There was something deeply unnatural about the way it looked, the way it moved. It wasn't human, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen either. I stopped the car, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the creature. It took a step forward, its long fingers curling as it moved. The way it walked was strange, slow and deliberate, almost as if it was studying me. My first instinct was to hit the gas and get the hell out of there, but for some reason, I couldn't move. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the thing as it crept closer. I had heard the stories of the Dover demon, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. It wasn't just a creature, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in our world. The air around it seemed to hum with a strange energy, and the closer it got, the more I could feel it. My hands were trembling as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady myself. Suddenly, the creature stopped. It stood there, maybe 10 feet away from the front of my car, staring at me with those glowing eyes. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my skin tingling with a sense of unease. Then, without warning, the creature turned and sprinted into the woods. It moved with an unnatural speed, its thin limbs carrying it through the trees faster than any human could run. In the blink of an eye, it was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the forest. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just seen. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it as a trick of the light, or maybe a weird animal, but deep down, I knew better. That thing wasn't normal. It wasn't something that belonged in our world. I finally snapped out of my daze and slammed my foot on the gas, speeding down the road as fast as my car would go. The trees whipped past me, but all I could think about was the creature, the Dover demon. I didn't stop driving until I reached the safety of my driveway, several towns away. For days after the encounter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every time I walked outside at night, I felt like I was being followed, like those glowing eyes were still out there, lurking in the shadows. I started having nightmares, dreams of the creature standing at the foot of my bed, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. I tried telling Claire about it, but she just laughed, thinking I was trying to scare her. I wanted to believe that maybe I had imagined the whole thing, that the long drive and the late hour had made me see something that wasn't really there. But deep down, I knew what I saw. I wasn't the only one either. Over the years, more sightings of the Dover demon popped up, each one eerily similar to mine. People reported seeing a small, pale creature with glowing eyes, lurking in the woods at night. Some said it watched them from the trees, while others claimed it followed them down the road, just out of sight. I haven't been back to Dover since that night, and I don't plan on returning anytime soon. Whatever the Dover demon is, I want no part of it. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and that thing in the woods, it's one of them. was early September 2012 when my life changed in a way I never imagined. I had just graduated from college and moved back home to a small town in Braxton County, West Virginia. It was one of those places where everyone knew each other, and stories of local legends were passed down from generation to generation. One story in particular always stood out, the tale of the Flatwoods Monster. My grandfather had told me the story countless times growing up, about how in 1952, a group of locals had witnessed something otherworldly in the woods near Flatwoods. According to the tale, they had seen a massive, glowing figure with a spade-shaped head and large eyes, hovering above the ground in a thick mist. It was said to have terrorized the witnesses, leaving them with strange burns and a sense of dread that lasted for years. But like most people in town, I dismissed the story as a local legend, a fun bit of folklore, but nothing more. That was, until the night I came face to face with something I couldn't explain. It was a cool, clear evening, and I was out with my best friend, Jake. We had decided to go for a late-night drive through the back roads of Braxton County, a pastime we often enjoyed. The winding roads and dense forests always had an eerie charm, but that night, there was something different in the air. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but I felt an unshakable sense of unease. We were deep into the woods, miles away from the nearest town, when Jake suddenly pulled over on the side of the road. "Hey, did you see that?" he asked, his voice tinged with excitement. I hadn't seen anything, but I looked out the window, scanning the dark woods for whatever had caught his eye. "There's something out there," he insisted, pointing toward the tree line. I squinted, trying to make out any movement in the dense brush. At first, I saw nothing, but then, just for a second, I caught a glimpse of a light, a faint, greenish glow, flickering through the trees. "What is that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake shook his head. "I don't know, but it's coming from the old Flatwoods area." I felt a chill run down my spine. The Flatwoods Monster legend had always been centered around that part of the county, and seeing something strange out there brought those old stories rushing back to the forefront of my mind. Without saying another word, Jake threw the car into park and grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment. "Come on, let's check it out," he said, already halfway out of the car. "Are you crazy?" I protested. The last thing I wanted to do was go into the woods at night, especially not near Flatwoods. But Jake was already moving, and I couldn't let him go alone. So, against my better judgment, I followed him into the darkness. The woods were thick and overgrown, making it hard to navigate even with the flashlight. The air was damp and heavy, and every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made my heart race. We walked in silence for what felt like an eternity, the glow ahead of us growing brighter with each step. Finally, we reached a small clearing, and that's when we saw it. Hovering just a few feet off the ground was the source of the light, a glowing greenish orb, about the size of a basketball. It pulsated softly, casting an eerie glow over the surrounding trees. I stared at it, completely mesmerized, my mind racing to find an explanation. "What the hell is that?" Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. Before I could answer, we both heard it, a low, mechanical hum, like the sound of machinery coming to life. It seemed to be coming from all around us, growing louder and louder, until it filled the entire clearing. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the orb's glow, was a figure. It was tall, at least 7 or 8 feet, and its head was shaped like a spade, just like the stories had described. Its eyes were large and glowing, and its body was covered in a metallic-looking armor that shimmered in the light. The air around it seemed to shimmer and warp, as if reality itself was bending in its presence. Jake and I stood frozen, unable to move or speak, as the creature slowly moved closer. Its mechanical hum seemed to resonate through the ground beneath our feet, and with each step, the temperature dropped noticeably. I could see my breath in the air, and my skin prickled with a cold that felt unnatural, like it was seeping into my bones. The creature stopped just a few feet from us, its glowing eyes fixed on us. There was no mistaking it. We were face to face with the Flatwoods monster. I don't know how long we stood there, locked in a silent standoff with the creature. Time seemed to stretch and bend, and every second felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the sweat on my palms as I gripped the flashlight tighter. Suddenly, without warning, the creature raised one of its long, metallic arms. For a moment, I thought it was going to attack, but instead, the air around us seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. The orb in the center of the clearing flickered, and the hum grew louder, almost deafening. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the creature turned and vanished into the trees, disappearing into the darkness without a sound. The orb's glow dimmed, and the hum faded away, leaving Jake and me standing in stunned silence. Neither of us spoke as we made our way back to the car. There was nothing to say. We had both seen the same thing, and whatever it wasn't something that could be easily explained. That night haunted me for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature's glowing eyes, felt the cold air around me, and heard that strange, mechanical hum. I tried to tell myself that it was just a trick of the light, that maybe we had both imagined it. But deep down, I knew the truth. The Flatwoods monster was real. And it was still out there, lurking in the woods of Braxton County, waiting for the next unlucky soul to cross its path. I haven't gone back to that part of the county since. Jake and I don't talk about it, and I avoid the subject whenever someone brings up the old Flatwoods monster legend. Some things are better left forgotten, and that night in the woods is one of them.